science policy and advocacy is a topic that I've been thinking about for a really long time, doing research on even longer. And I'm very passionate about this topic. And so, as well as professional development of graduate students, which is something I've been doing for more than 10 years now. And I have given this talk various different places. So I look forward to this opportunity and hope that you will gain something great from it. And then also Harinder will be monitoring any questions you have in the chat, and he has the ability to interrupt me during this talk to ask them if they're pertinent then, or we can cover some things at the end. So what we're going to do in terms of an overview, the table of contents, is I'm going to go through my credentials, which is a lot of what you heard Harinder Singh just mention, but then a few other things just to give you an idea of where I come at this topic of science policy and advocacy from. Then I'm going to go through some definitions, give a very, very basic overview of how to understand the issue, the policy issue that is at hand or that you want to delve into, and then talk a bit about responsible communication, gaining experience, and mention some resources that are available to you. So let's get started. All right, so first of all, in terms of my credentials and experience, as Harinder mentioned, I was a Science and Technology Policy Fellow with the American Association for the Advancement of Science. This is the position I had before I came to UC Irvine. So for a year, I was working in the Environmental Protection Agency in the Office of the Science Advisor. The Science Advisor works closely with the EPA's administrator, which is the highest level at the EPA, to go to Congress to give expert testimony and discuss issues that pertain to environmental protection within the United States. So this Office of the Science Advisors has 4 different programs, and I worked for 2 of them. These are the 2 programs that deal with research ethics or scientific integrity. So the Scientific Integrity Program and the Human Subjects Research Program. I've continued to stay active with AAAS since then. I did become secretary of Section L for the History and Philosophy of Science. The way that AAAS is organized is that when you join as a member, you can designate up to 3 disciplinary sections that you have an affiliation with. And in my discipline, the History and Philosophy of Science, we are Section L. It's an arbitrary alphabetical designation. Our section is going to have its 100th anniversary in 2021. And this was the first real organization for our discipline. Even before there were any professional societies, we had recognition through AAAS as a section. What I do there is I'm a liaison between the Section L's steering group and AAAS staff. I help to coordinate activities among the 8 members of our steering group. We give guidance to AAAS on their procedures and their policies. We deal with fellowship nominations, which is an honorary title given to historians and philosophers, and we decide who we want to nominate each year from our disciplines. And then we also get things on the meeting programs and participate in the annual meetings. So earlier this year, AAAS asked 20 of us members and active members with AAAS to join a government's modernization project. So we were actually helping them for the first time in 70 years to rethink how they do all of their processes and to develop new policies that will guide how AAAS functions. So this is something I started a couple months ago, and we'll be working on pretty dedicated for the next year, at which point we will turn over our report to AAAS so that their board of directors and council of committee affairs can look it over, as well as others, the president, CEO, and all. In addition to the work that I've done with AAAS in the last few years, I have several research areas that I've done as a historian of science. Science, policy, and society are the main areas that I've worked on. That includes not just science policy, but also scientists as political activists. I've taught repeatedly a course on science and war, as well as public controversies involving science and technology. And some of the themes that come out of that work have to do with repression of scientists, as well as a lot about science writing, communication, including popularizations of science and informal science education. Research ethics and the history of life sciences are the two other main bodies of work. So history of life sciences, I primarily have worked in evolution, genetics, and molecular biology. This is the history of these topics, typically covering the 1930s through 50s. This has also required me to do a lot in human sciences like anthropology and medicine, as well as organic chemistry. And there's a lot in my work that has to do, again, with repression of scientists, especially eugenics and scientific racism, all these different topics in the history of life sciences are ones that, while I wrote about them in the past, I continue to follow currently, and then also are policy topics that I'm interested in. Research integrity is that last batch that I want to talk about. A lot of you have probably taken responsible conduct of research training. This is something that NIH and NSF mandate. If you are a graduate student who is funded by either National Institutes or National Science Foundation here in the United States, you have to have RCR training. I've conducted those trainings, and I've helped formulate what that would be at a previous institution that I worked at. We've also, I've received NSF funding from the National Science Foundation funding to do programs in the social responsibilities of researchers. So this is scientists who want to be politically active or advocates, and how do you do that responsibly? When I went into EPA, I did a lot of work in scientific integrity in the federal government, human subjects research and protections, and all of this is also seen through professional societies, which have their own codes of conduct and ethical guidelines. We've seen a lot of this with the Me Too movement and issues of sexual harassment. Those kinds of policies and guidelines have been really prominent in the past couple of years and so that's one of the ways you see professional societies also getting into these topics. So also in terms of my credentials, one of the things that I spent a lot of time on and have in the past 3 to 4 years is help mentor students, individuals who want science policy job advice and want help preparing for interviews. So since 2018, I've helped 6 individuals secure a policy fellowship. 4 of those are AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellows. 1 went to the California Council of Science and Technology. This is their STPF is modeled on the AAAS, and it's in Sacramento, and it deals with California issues. And then 1 with Genetics and Public Policy Fellow, which is through both the American Society for Human Genetics and then the National Human Genome Research Institute at NIH.
So Melinda, sorry, a quick question. I think this is relevant here about your credentials. Jose wants to know, are you elected, promoted, volunteered to do these positions? How do the terms work, especially from 2017 to 2024?
So I was asked to be secretary of Section L at AAAS, and I was invited by the CEO and president of AAAS to be part of the working group. In terms of mentoring, the individuals have sought me out after I've given this talk, which I've given at numerous universities in the United States. People have reached out to me, and they found me in various ways, and then I will have conversations with them or read through their proposals, their applications, and help them. So, for example, the 2 students I helped to get selected for advocacy days, the AAAS case workshop, which is catalyzing advocacy in science and engineering. She was an individual who was in one of the courses that I gave at University of Colorado Boulder. And she reached out after I gave that talk. And then the American Institute of Biological Sciences, that Emerging Public Policy and Leadership Award went to someone at UC Irvine who knew that I was really active in policy topics and had heard me talk and then approached me and asked if I could work with them. And that's how a lot of the other individuals have come my way, is through recommendations or having heard me speak. And so what I want to do really briefly is sort of sum all that up and just say that, you know, science has been the topic that I've studied for many, many years now. And the themes across all of what I've done have to do with policy, ethics, and communications. I mean, this is like my Venn diagram. These are the things that I really focus on. So that you're going to see are the themes of what I'm going to present today when I give you an overview of what science policy and advocacy are. That policy, ethics, and communications are part of how I view this topic. So at this point, I'm going to go into some definitions, starting with what's the difference between politics and policy. So politics is a process. It's a process of bargaining, negotiating, right? It's an attempt to compromise in the pursuit of a desired ends. A policy is a decision or a commitment to a course of action. So this is where you get regulations and laws that might be enacted by Congress or be the result of the judicial branch, so the Supreme Court. They could come out of the executive branch in the United States. So you might have it come out of the White House through executive order, or it might be something that one of the many federal agencies decide to pass as a regulation or a law. But a lot of times the executive agencies or the federal agencies are following what Congress or an executive order says. So then they have to figure out how are we going as NIH or Department of Education, Department of Energy, Department of Defense, or what have you, how are we going to enact this policy for our topics? So politics is the negotiation process. Policy is a decision or a commitment to action. There are two kinds of policy, science policy, that I'm going to define now. While these are two different aspects of science policy process, they do interact and reinforce with one another. So they are policy for science and science in policy. Policy for science is the infrastructure that allows scientists to perform research, right? So I'm going to give a couple examples from my own work, the kinds of things that I've worked on. Because I would say that the bulk of what I do is in the policy for science sphere. So both my master's thesis and my dissertation, I wrote about the founding of the National Science Foundation. The first bills went to Congress in 1943, and the National Science Foundation was founded 7 years later in 1950. So that whole process of negotiating the politics of it with various senators and getting that legislation passed, that's all part of the policy for science and making the infrastructure, available. As a lot of you probably know, National Science Foundation has a budget, and with that budget, they give the money to mainly universities, but other organizations as well, by giving them money for projects that you submit a grant. And that's really where my current research development work is. My job at UCI has me working with faculty in the School of Biological Sciences on developing grant applications, right? So we're looking to figure out what projects do we send to NIH, which projects do we send to NSF, which go to Department of Defense. And I'm always looking at, what is the budget and how is the budget going to change year to year? So how much money will a federal agency have that's going to be supporting research that our School of Biological Sciences does? I follow that information. But also what initiatives are national priorities now, which are coming down the pipeline, which are sunsetting and are no longer going to be priorities, because this is dictates how much money goes to the different entities. And so keeping up on all these different trends helps me to help the faculty at the school that I work with be more competitive for that funding so that they can do the research that they want to do. Science and policy, the other side of it, this is where a lot of people, when they think about science policy, this is what they think about. They think about wanting to use science to inform policy. So this involves evidence-based decision-making. It's, for example, you want to have an impact on legislation and regulations, and you have a particular topic that your science deals with, whether it's climate change, space exploration, AIDS research, cancer research. There's something that you know based on your expertise and your research that you would like to share with policymakers. And that's the science and policy side. But as you can tell, you know, these two interact. They are not exclusive, but they're actually very much reinforce one another. And that's something to keep in mind throughout this course that you're taking. So I do want to go into now advocacy, right? So this is a science policy and advocacy course. So what is advocacy? So most advocacy can be put into two places, right? Into two, again, separated into two things. There's advocacy for science and advocacy for policy. So most scientists are comfortable participating in advocacy for science more so than advocacy for policy. So advocacy for science, this could be something, for example, calling for more funding for pancreatic cancer research. That stem cell research should be funded at the national level. You might have particular views on environmental science needs, where money needs to go in the environmental sciences, and you can advocate that those sciences are important and that funding should go into certain areas. You also might more generally call for international cooperation between scientists, whether during times of war or other periods. So these types of science diplomacy efforts are also advocacy for science, right? So if you have concerns about the ability to share information internationally with your colleagues, you know, that can be an issue where you want to advocate for internationalism in science and for no borders between the work that you do, or who can move between different countries to be students and to do research. So the other topic about advocacy for policy, this is where you might, an example would be curbing greenhouse gas emissions. Because you think that advocating for that particular policy action is going to help deal with environmental degradation and climate change. So if you call for a very specific course of action, you're advocating for a particular policy. Another example might be you want it to be required that children be fully vaccinated to attend public schools. That's a specific policy that you're asking to be enacted. And so they're scientific topics and you're advocating for the policy that they're based on. So one last thing I'm going to go into is what is talking about expert and advocate. And these are not like official definitions, but I think it helps anyone who wants to enter in the science policy and advocacy area to think in terms of both two different kinds of roles that scientists play in this sphere, whether an expert or an advocate, and most people do both. So I'm going to go into a little bit further depth here, just the way I'm going to define it for these purposes of talking today. So for example, an expert might be asked to give testimony to Congress, right? Or at in a case of that's in front of a judge and jury, a legal case. So here you're going to share expertise with others to bring clarity to the issue. You're providing information based on your expertise, and you're presenting the information so that others can make a decision for themselves, possibly. But you also might get into the area of advocating for a particular policy, right? Where you start also telling others what you want them to think, what course of action they should take, or how they should even vote. So this, I think, is important to think through, what role you have and want to have in the policy arena. And the bulk of what I'm going to go through next really starts to help tease some of this apart and bring some better clarity to what it is that I'm trying to point out here between this idea of expert and advocate. So first of all, there's the issue, right? The policy issue that you want to contribute to. So the question is, to what degree can science inform decision-making on a given political topic? So to do this, I'm actually borrowing from work done by Roger Pilkey, Jr., through his book, The Honest Broker, and I have this listed on the next slide and in the resources. In this, what he does is he presents two political issues: tornado politics and abortion politics. So this will help you to understand the kinds of policy issues there are, but also the roles that scientists take in the policy arena. All right, so tornado politics. If we were all in the same room right now and someone were to run into the room and say that a tornado is approaching, what might we do? Well, first of all, we want to know whether or not this is factual information. So we're listening for a tornado siren. We're looking at weather advisories online. We look outside for evidence of a tornado. And in this case of both tornado politics and abortion politics, we have to collectively make one decision for the group. And in tornado politics, we collectively decide that we are going to go to the basement and wait for notification that the tornado is no longer a threat, right? It's pretty easy for us to come to this decision and to take action. And that is because we all value our lives and we want to live through the tornado. So we're willing to quickly and collectively take an action that's going to benefit us and saving our lives. And so in this case, we have our values, the scientific evidence we have, that the threat is coming, but also we have a common value or set of values to live through the tornado that's helping to guide us on the course of action that we collectively take. So abortion politics, to go to another extreme, is, okay, so now we as a community have to collectively make a decision about whether our whole community, our whole group, will allow abortion or not. So one person says no because of religious reasons. Another says let a woman decide for herself and her body. And we actually get to the point where we reach an impasse because we value different things. And collectively, we as a community are not going to be able to come to a decision that satisfies everyone. So in this case of abortion politics, the systematic pursuit of knowledge, whether we're talking our scientific approach, our evidence-based decision-making, it is not going to get us to make one collective decision and vote the same. We have too many differing values and they hold too much weight in abortion politics for us to collectively as a large community come to one consensus. And so we cannot approach, and this is what Pilkey explores in his book, we cannot approach abortion politics in the same way that we would approach tornado politics. And so really this is the bottom line that I just want you to think about in terms of science policy is know what type of science policy issue you have in front of you. If you look at them as being on a spectrum, then you want to figure out where the issue lies on a spectrum between tornado politics and abortion politics. And this will help to determine the degree to which scientific information can bring about a consensus, or to which degree scientific information really is not going to move the needle. And that's really important to know going in before, in part because to know how to communicate what you want to say, you need to know what kind of issue you're dealing with. And so you want to know the degree to which scientific evidence can inform the decision-making or the policy action. And you want to know, yes.
A quick thing, are we on, is this the slide you wanted to project?
Yes.
Or there's more?
Yes.
Okay, well, okay. I think there was confusion. People thought there's another slide too. Okay, so
yeah, no, I'll get to that. That's another point I'll make next.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, so you want to know the degree to which debate on a given topic involves science and values. Really, this is something that a lot of people in the science studies, which I'm part of as a historian, but also philosophers, sociologists of science, and others work on, is really thinking about issues of science and values and how these different things play into topics, including science policy. But it also is important for you to know how to be an effective communicator, to know what kind of issue you have. So I do want to go into one other point that Roger Pilkey makes in his book, which is about the roles that scientists adopt in the policy arena. So what he does is he sketches out 4 different roles. I'm actually not going to go through the first 2, but I do want to discuss one of the points he makes about issue advocate and the honest broker, for which he titled the book. So if you were to go to an issue advocate and try to, an issue advocate would give you advice in terms of they would try to get you to make a particular selection, right? So the issue advocate tells the decision maker which choice is preferable and makes a case for one alternative or another or a set of alternatives. And so what Pilkey does in this book, in his work, is to show how it is that an issue advocate limits the choices for the decision maker, and maybe even turns the situation into a very binary one of either or. Whereas he proposes that a better role for scientists to consider adopting in the policy arena is one of the honest broker, in that the honest broker is someone who provides a decision maker with factual information on various options. So the honest broker's goal is actually to expand the scope of choice for the decision maker. And the decision maker then is left with the challenge of reducing the scope of options to make an informed decision that best fits their personal views, opinions, needs. And so this enables a decision maker to choose for them or for their community. So one other point that he does make in this, and again, is that another reason why to consider being someone who expands the number of options in the way that you talk about science policy issues is that it can be very easy for all 3, the first 3, the pure scientist and the science arbiter, to become science issue advocates. And so you have the tendency that the role of scientists is actually to push towards advocating for a particular policy. And a lot of that can also have to do with how politicians want to hear the information, and the questions they're asking are trying to push you to help them make a decision or to make the decision for them. And that's how stealth issue advocacy or issue advocacy can happen. So I highly recommend this book if you aren't already familiar with it. What I presented are just 2 of the many chapters in it, but it does help to sort of tease out some of these roles that there are in science policy. So I'm going to shift. Yes.
There's one question. I think it's very relevant to the previous slide. So Jennifer wants to know, are mask requirements for coronavirus an example of tornado politics or abortion politics?
The mouse?
The mask for during Corona. Yeah.
Mask requirements for coronavirus. So that's a highly politicized topic now. While we think it should be as easy as tornado politics, I would say that what we're seeing is that it's playing out closer to abortion politics because it's become so politicized in the United States. and this is one of the things that can be difficult, but if you understand and kind of assess what the issue is and how it's being discussed in the policy arena, it'll give you the ability to figure out how you need to engage your audience. And that gets me to the next point that I want to just briefly touch on in terms of responsible communication. So, as I mentioned, I do a lot of work in ethics and a lot of work in communication, and that's where responsible communication practices comes about. So I do want to talk a little bit about, let's say you decide you do want to be someone who's talking about policies for science, or you want to promote policies that have to do with STEM education, or even policies that have to do with controversial topics, scientific topics in the United States, ones that have been politicized. There are responsible communication practices that you can use. So there are 3 points I'm going to make here. One is qualify your statements. So what I mean here is explain what is scientific knowledge, what is known, and you might even explain what is unknown, but also what is your interpretation of the science, or what is the consensus about the science. And then when you talk about your opinion that's based on your values, you want to make sure you qualify those statements and differentiate them from ones about the science. One of the ways that I've seen communicators do this is people use, when they're talking on a stage, they will move from one side of the stage to the other. So they will talk about the science on one side of the stage, and then they will talk about their opinions on the other side of the stage, as a way to communicate visibly that they're shifting modes from one speaker to another. Another way I've seen this is literally putting on and off hats or coats. So you actually put on a lab coat to talk about the science, and you take it off when you start talking as a parent, or you're talking about when you're talking as a member of the community who is faced with an issue. State your intentions. So one of the things that you can do in terms of responsible communication, if you're in the policy arena, is to state whether you are there to advocate for a particular policy or not. So if you go in it as an advocate, you can be upfront that you're a citizen advocating your personal views. For example, you could say that I am a scientist. I do environmental science. I have concerns about fracking. This is what the science tells me. This is my interpretation. And then, I'm also someone who lives in this community and doesn't want fracking in my backyard, or does want fracking in my backyard. And those are the kinds of things where you can take on, you can actually state your intentions and say, I'm here to talk about this, and I come with this, but I'm here to talk about fracking, but I come with a background and expertise that helps me come to my decision, and lay that out. And that helps you to qualify your statements. The last thing on this I want to talk about is to know your boundaries. This is something that I see a lot that's highly problematic, in that a lot of individuals in the policy arena don't necessarily decide what they are willing to say and not say. And so you want to know what your boundaries are, especially because when you're dealing with media and policymakers, a lot of time it's interviews and conversations. And so you are being asked to respond to the questions they present to you, and that those questions can actually be presented to you in a way that puts you to say things you don't want to say. And so if a politician wants to know what action to take, you need to decide, what you're willing to say, what you're not willing to say, and you need to really prepare beforehand to be effective, but then also to walk out of the room and feel like you didn't compromise your standards or your principles, or that you didn't get across what you wanted to get across, and that somehow you were manipulated. You don't want to go there. That means you want to figure out what your boundaries are. So I'll just give one example of how you might do this, or how you might have seen this. You might be asked a question that attempts to get you to say something, that you don't want to. So a very common practice is called block and bridge. This is a strategy for giving the answer you prepared rather than answering the question that was asked. So if you've ever listened to an interview and the interviewer asks a question and then the interviewee responds the following, this is block and bridge. Actually, the question that you asked isn't really the right one. The question we should be asking is X, and to which I would respond Y. So in that case, the person blocked the question they didn't want to answer, bridged to the question that they wanted to answer, and then provided the answer that they had provided, or that they had been ready to provide, and had really practiced, and it's inside the boundaries that they have set for themselves about what they want to say and what their bounds are in terms of an advocate or an expert. So these are 3 responsible communication tactics that can be used. There's actually a really good code of conduct for advocacy in science that is only a couple hundred words.
Melissa, can I?
Yeah.
Melinda, just one quick question. I think that was relevant to the previous slide. Very good question. One person asked, it seems that when an issue is politicized, it is a result of politicians aligning themselves with an issue to make it political. Is this preventable? Is there a way to confirm ownership of an issue? So if your message is manipulated, you have control over it.
So we see both ways. We see the politicization of science, but we also see the scientization of politics. In this case, where people try to politicize scientific topics, it's really important to know what issue you're dealing with and how politicized it might be, because that would then also dictate, and if you know who your audience is your audience like-minded, or might there be people in the audience who could confront you? It'll allow you to better prepare for how you want to talk on the topic and how you're going to address certain questions that might come up in that case. I'm not sure that really answers what the question was.
Jose, if you're not satisfied, you could write in the chat, and otherwise write us an email and we'll get you a detailed response. Thank you.
So, I want to go briefly through this code of conduct since it is short, but I think it also is another way to think through these different levels of interacting and the roles that you take on in the policy arena. So what Nicholas Stenek did is he put it into 3 groups. The first group is, as a scientist, you want to be honest, accountable, fair, and a good steward in all of your professional work. You want to accept responsibility for the trustworthiness of your science. So first and foremost, if you're going in as a scientist, or even if you're going in as a citizen with a concern, if you're going to be presenting as a scientist or be presenting scientific information, be honest, be accountable, be fair, and accept responsibility for the science that you're, the trustworthiness of the science that you're speaking about. Next, then he goes on to, when acting primarily as a scientist who's reporting, explaining, or interpreting your work, you want to think about presenting the information clearly in understandable terms. Avoid making exaggerated or unsubstantiated claims. Be aware of and make your interests transparent when presenting views on particular decisions. So again, state your intentions. Point out the weaknesses and limitations of your arguments, including data that conflict with your recommendations. So that would be honest brokering. Present opposing scientific views, recognize critiques by others. That's more ability to sort of honest broker and be transparent, and recognize when your activities as a scientist merge into advocacy. So again, stating your intentions up front. And then the last one that he says, when providing advice to others on policies and courses of action, which is advocating, base your advocacy on your area or areas of expertise, separating formal expertise from experience-based expertise and personal opinions. Make clear when you are speaking as an individual scientist, as opposed to someone formally representing a scientific organization and or a group of scientists. Be aware of the impact your actions as an advocate can have on science and its uses, and take steps to become knowledgeable about the complex issues that have a bearing on public decisions. Take the second bullet point about making clear who you represent when you speak. When you work for a federal agency, if you go to a professional meeting and your name tag says that you work for that agency. So when I worked for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, I was at the scientific meeting as a representative of EPA, and everything that I did during that meeting reflected as something that the EPA stood for and that the EPA supported. That's how the EPA wanted us to go to professional societies anytime we were bearing their agency on our name tags. So that's an example where you clearly have to show when you're representing an organization or something else, or a group of scientists, but then also that's different than if you're sharing your own personal opinion.
Melinda, there one question relevant. How do you approach to depolarize contentional issues and start a dialogue?
So I think there are so many good communication practices out there, and it's definitely something this course is going to go into more. But again, part of it is going to be how it is you present who you are and why you're there, I think has a lot to do with it, because part of your effectiveness is going to be your rapport with your audience, whether that is someone who's in a congressional office of a senator or the senator themselves or some other venue. Who they think you are and what it is that you're trying to achieve is going to inform how they come into the meeting to meet you. So part of it is just being clear and upfront about what you're going to do, but then also trying to build a rapport so that they're willing to listen to you and actually listen to you, or to find and search out means to be effective. And there's so many great courses and great books and other information out there on how to do this. And I know that some of the communication tactics you'll learn here will help with that as well. I am going to share some resources in a moment that'll help you with this kind of thing as too. So one of the other topics that's going to go through this, that you'll learn a lot during this course, is about internships, fellowships, and other educational programs, right? The goal here is, how can you learn about and gain work experience in science policy and government? So I really just want to say this to be hopefully so that it's encouraging, which is that we don't give degrees in science policy. And this is something that Harinder mentioned in the beginning. We don't have PhD programs in science policy. It's not a topic people get degrees in. Sure, you might have a law degree and there's certain topics about patent law or science topics that you work on, or medical topics, but most people don't get degrees in science policy. What that means is that people with PhDs and other degrees, higher degrees in STEM fields and STEM related fields such as mine, gain experience through internships and fellowships. And that's exactly what these fellowships are for. They're to be postdoctoral fellowships or one-year fellowships to give you the tooling to work in science policy and to be effective in science policy. And once you have that experience, it can sets you up to help you get jobs, not only in government, but also nonprofit sector, academia, industry. And you're going to be learning about all of this throughout the course of this, the science policy course that's happening over the next several months. So one last point on this: why do an internship or fellowship in science policy? Why consider spending a year or a few months immersed in this? is because it takes a job to get a job. And even though that's a bit crass, it's really not that far off, especially for some jobs in the policy and government sectors, because those jobs are created to hire a known person. They have an internal candidate. They're not actually looking for someone, but they have to advertise and they have to interview. So another reason you can learn how to submit competitive applications for jobs by engaging with the group, starting to learn the lingo, and getting more acquainted with the kinds of things and the issues that it would be. So if your goal is to really transition, I would say not only take the course, but use your networks and your contacts, because those are the people who are going to open doors for you. They're going to help get your name on a short list if your ultimate goal is to go into one of these areas, whether it's through a fellowship or to get a job. So the last couple of slides are a lot of resources, and I will give a couple of descriptors about each. The Science Policy, a guide to policy careers for scientists, I highly recommend. It was on your reading list for today. This has an introduction to science policy. It discusses the science policy settings, as well as what are some issue areas. And it has a whole career section that offers advice about planning for a science policy career, what kind of academic programs and extracurricular activities you might want to do to start retooling yourself for science policy work or advocacy work. And the appendices are just 25 pages of personal narratives from various individuals. And a lot of them, it's just, they've been part of different fellowships and are talking about their experiences and what they've done. So I highly recommend this, especially if you want to learn more about science policy and what kind of careers are out there. If you're interested in science policy as a topic, I already mentioned The Honest Broker, but there's also Playing Politics with Science by David Resnick, The Code of Conduct for Advocacy in Science I went over with by Nicholas Stenek. If you are trying to understand what's going on in terms of politicization of science, you might check out Sean Otto's The War on Science, Who's Waging It, Why It Matters, and What We Can Do About It. In terms of professional development, if you're looking to get hone your communication skills or work on your own development so that you will be more effective in the policy area, one book I highly recommend, Escape from the Ivory Tower, A Guide to Making Your Science Matter by Nancy Barron, is meant for scientists who want to engage the media and want to engage policymakers. And it actually has tools that you can use to, when you go into an interview, or even when you want to write on such topics, or present yourself on a website as being someone in this area. It helps you distill your message effectively so that you can convey to your audience what it is you want to do. But it also has chapters on how to understand your audience, whether your audience is someone in the media or a policymaker. And those things it's so important to know your audience in order to be effective. So what are you going to do with that? Finding careers outside of academia. I recommend this book if you're trying to figure out how to talk about your expertise and skills, and you feel like all you can do is talk to peers in your discipline. This book helps you to actually figure out how to talk about what it is you do, what your skills are, what your skill set is, and pitch yourself to different sectors other than academia. Brag, The Art of Tooting Your Own Horn Without Blowing It. If you happen to be someone who has problems talking about your own accomplishments and being an advocate for yourself, Brag will help you do that. But it also helps you to do it in a way that doesn't make you come off arrogant and the type of person someone does not want to hire or have as a colleague in their office space. So I recommend that in case you feel like what I see is that a lot of times it's that people are on the side of, they don't know how to actually talk about their accomplishments effectively. And so this book helps you to do that. And then if you are more interested in the storytelling side of science policy, because one effective means for getting your views across to a wide public is figuring out how to use storytelling to convey your message, you might check out Story Collider, which is Story Collider has used to move around the country and do various presentations. Some are science policy, but some are just strictly about the science. And so you can see examples of individuals giving talks in which they use storytelling effectively to convey what they want you to know about science or about the scientific method or the processes that scientists do. And so it's a way to help individuals who don't know much about science or don't really know what scientists do engage with science in a different manner. And some of the individuals who participate with Story Collider specifically try to do science policy topics. And then one last thing is, if you do want to stay up to date, these are some examples, but not the only ones. The best way to be effective in the policy arena is to know what's going on and to have been following the issues for a while. And so if you are on various listservs and you're reading articles and you're keeping up with what's going on, that's going to help make you more effective about what the tone is out, what the tone is that other people are reporting on the topic, and then also what kinds of topics you might want to share. So you can look at some of these different examples. It really depends what your topic is that you're interested in, who it is you want to follow, and where you'll find that information. And then if you do want to engage, AAAS has some resources as well. And some of this is more professional development how-tos, and some of it is gives you ideas for things that you might want to do. So these are all various resources to help you figure out what science policy and advocacy are, how to be an effective communicator, how to do it responsibly, as well as just figure out how do you get your toes in the water in order to be effective in policy topics. So I will leave it at that, and I'm sure there are questions, but we also have some other things that are going to be presented by Adriana and Melissa as well. So Harinder, I will stop sharing and turn it over to you.
Melinda, thank you very much. This was very comprehensive and very broader overview, bird's eye view of the whole science policy landscape. I'm so glad that you were able to touch upon some aspects about transition, communication skills. Those are things we're going to get into more details as in future modules. With that, we are open to questions. I know we answered a lot of questions as we were going along, but this is your time to ask more questions. There was one question earlier, I think I missed, I couldn't ask. I think this question was by Ankita. She asked, how do you approach okay, that one was done. It was the enforcement code. Melissa, were you able to answer that by Jose?
I did.
Okay, great, thank you. I like the teamwork. Okay, we're going to give a minute more to see if maybe you're still typing the question, or maybe this time will help you to think about a question. But some people asked about the resources listed in the last few slides. We will share the slides with you, and that'll have resources listed. If not, on the website, we have a resources tab. We will update that tab with the resources listed on the website. We have one question by Nimi. Are there avenues to engage with the government for pandemic solutions?
There has been such a flurry of activity since February, March, because of COVID-19, right? And it's been really interesting to watch, especially because I'm in research development, because a lot of it has been people devoting money to do research on pandemic issues. And it's also forcing researchers to see how their research is applicable to what's going on now. and then working on that topic and in that area. We've even seen where foundations have, they've stopped programs they usually would do and put all the money to COVID-19 research instead. So that response was the immediate mobilization response. Now that we're further into it, we're starting to see where people are really trying to think about, okay, we dealt with the first wave of pandemic. Now that we've kind of settled into it, we're now in more of a maintenance and ongoing phase, and we got to think about how to do this for the future, and what kinds of things should we be doing now to prepare for what might happen down the line. So I would say that that's where a lot of things are going. But everything's been really hodgepodge and individualized based on professional societies, foundations, agencies, and there hasn't really been like a collective action too much that I've seen yet. But I haven't been following actually too much what some of the larger groups are doing. But a lot of times when something wants to go really big, United Nations comes into play, right? And they become one of the main actors. They did this on issues of race in the 1950s and 60s. And they've been active with pandemic issues as well currently.
Great. Thank you, Melinda. There's another question. Can you please explain the abortion theory?
In terms of like abortion politics,
I believe, yeah.
Yeah, the main point I just want to make is that if you're going to engage in climate change, or you're going to engage on space exploration, or you're going to engage on any particular topic in the sciences, try to figure out what kind of issue is it, right? Whether or not the issue is one that is going to be very contentious and you're going to it could actually spark a lot of emotion, or if it's one that actually there's a lot of consensus about. And the thing about this is it changes over time, right? If you look to the late 19th, early 20th century, this is me being a historian, we had a lot of children working in factories. And we eventually became very commonplace to believe that until a certain age or until a certain level of schooling, individuals have to go to school. They cannot be working in factories. They need to be going to school. We've definitely shifted how we look at issues of abuse and who has rights in a partnership or a marriage. So these kinds of things change over time, and part of it is just following topics and knowing where the needle is and how it's fluctuating, because that's how you're going to be most effective. So in terms of abortion politics, the idea there is that is an issue that people's values make them very strident on one side or another. It can be something that just is a no-go topic and people will not engage in at all. And if that's the case, you have to pick your battles and you have to figure out what makes the most sense in terms of how to engage. And sometimes that engagement is better through organizations and groups, and sometimes it's better through lots of one-on-one conversations. And so you kind of need to know the issue to know what makes the most sense for how to proceed and through what means to proceed. So that's the main thing I wanted to point out with those two very divergent types of situations, so that you just have an appreciation for that not all science policy topics are created equal. They're not going to be received by people in the same way, and you really need to know what you're up against to be effective.
Linda, we have a question from Erin. She wants to know, what drew you to science policy in the beginning? How does science policy work today compared to what you expected when you started?
So I explain this actually in the podcast a lot that Harinder has. I am a historian, and I always knew that I worked in science and politics, but I never really knew much about science policy, even while I was working as a PhD student on my work. It wasn't until I started engaging in science policy that I saw how everything I had done was through the lens of science policy. And I will admit that probably a lot of this has to do with the fact that my father worked his entire career for the United States General Accounting Office, which is now the US GAO, General Accountability Office. What they do is they write the reports that are presented to Congress so that Congress can make decisions on various policies. So he did Mexican, California border issues, he did NAFTA, he did all kinds of different topics. So I've just been in the discussions of policy for a long time, and then science and history of science is the direction I went, and these ended up merging for me, that I worked in those areas. I think though with science, you know, we have seen, we're in a highly politicized situation right now, but that's not unlike what we saw in the McCarthy era or in, you know, the height of the Cold War, which is an area that I worked a lot on. So part of it can just be that, you know, there are examples that you can look to see what was effective previously that might be effective again. And sometimes you have to find a similar climate to know, or a similar situation to really find a good counterpart if you're looking for examples of the past, because every time and place is unique. And so it can be hard to say, you know, the comparisons are helpful, but if you're not very cognizant of what people did then, I don't know how helpful it is to know how much we change now to know how effective those things are or are not. But I think right now we definitely are in a period that has a couple of you know, maybe some parallels in the past, but for the most part, not in recent times and not in most people's lifetimes who are active researchers now. So they're all coming up against issues for the first time.
Great. We have a question from Sandeep. Sandeep says, where can we find your work on scientists who became politicians? Do you have a website that's your body of work?
I think most of it's on LinkedIn. So it should be available through through the LinkedIn, that the link that you gave to me.
Sure.
That gets you to LinkedIn up for me. It should be there.
Okay, and I think we're pretty much done, but there are a couple of, you know, similar questions which are related to visa issues, fellowships being open to citizens, non-citizens. What's your take on it? Seems like that varies by society.
A lot. If you're going to work for a U.S. governmental agency, they are going to require citizenship. It can be very hard. I don't think any of the you know, AAAS or some of those other, there's also the Presidential Management Fellows, they place into federal agencies. You have to be a citizen for those. But there are others, like I think Adriana mentioned Zion Fellows. They are through the national academies. I don't think you need to have U.S. citizenship for that one. There are opportunities out there, but also you don't need to be in the U.S. government to deal with policy issues, right? I mean, Melissa from is shaking her head. There are a lot of nonprofits and other groups, sometimes some of them watchdog groups, that are trying to make sure that the federal agencies are doing what they're supposed to do in the way they're supposed to be doing it. And those are organizations where it doesn't matter what your citizenship is, and you can get experience, internships, and exposure to science policy through them, whatever the case is for your citizenship in the United States. So keep in mind that there are all these advocacy groups out there, watchdog groups, as well as just various nonprofits, non-governmental organizations that you can be active with. And, you know, that's even something like, you know, a national group that wants to make sure, you know, that cares about Alzheimer's disease or cancer research. You know, they all have people who are advocating for more funding for their research and for particular awareness, so that more work can be done. So it just really depends on what topics you're interested in and who's working on them, and then what are the limitations in terms of eligibility that'll allow you to do them, that's going to help guide to where you want to go. There are a couple of websites that can help you to do this, which I can add the links to my PowerPoint before I send it out.
Sure.
That some of which are actual databases where you say, I'm a graduate student and I'm not a citizen, and then it shoots you back what you qualify for or what you might be able to apply to.
Great. So we have, in the interest of time, I think I would like to keep it really brief. We'll take one last question. There's one overlapping question, so I'm combining two. Someone wants to know about differences between science policy and engineering policy. And we also have one student who is from engineering background, wants to know, what kind of policy work can someone from engineering background get into? They are really interested in policy.
So first of all, when I talk science policy, I'm talking STEM, double M, like science, technology, engineering, mathematics, medicine, it all. There's opportunities out there for all of it. Even with the Science Technology Policy Fellowship I did through AAAS as an engineer, I think you need a master's, not a PhD. So that's a different level. That's the only thing where you need a master's. Otherwise, you need a JD. You need you can have any kind of degree, but it has to be one of higher. And in the sciences, it has to be a PhD. In terms of engineering, if you aren't familiar with it, you might look at, there's a educational program on engineering and public policy that if you really want to gain more understanding about it, I believe that's, is it Carnegie University? But there's an actual PhD program in engineering and public policy. One of the individuals that, there it is, and one of the people that I've been working with on an NSF grant that has to do with how invasive species migrate on ships. So the global shipping across oceans, like network, how does an invasive species move from one port to another port and then, get uptake? We have somebody out of that program who does maritime policy topics and knows everything about the ins and outs of these ships and the ports. And so it's for him, it's knowing public policy and it's knowing the mechanizations of how everything works in that area that makes him effective on our team with invasive species experts, with people who are also, working in environmental DNA research. And then we also have additional individuals with purely policy and politics backgrounds on it. But the goal of the project is to find a group of people who know the science and can inform the policy. And to do that, they brought this group of people. But that's an example of someone who came out of that program and now is using that research to do work on a policy issue, which is they're trying to help decision makers decide what kinds of rules there should be about how long should a ship stay out of port or how fast or slow or how long at sea does a ship need to be, a vessel, so that the invasive species die and do not retain in the ballast water, do not retain on the hull, and then cannot actually instate themselves in a new port that they previously were not at. And so their work is to try to map out where the ships are going to and from and where the invasive species are moving and what steps might you take to curb this and to not have it happen for new species.
Great. Thank you, Melinda. I think in the interest of time, we're going to stop question answer here.